Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hello, I'm Jenny Ferns, and I grew up in England, and I moved to Canada and then to the United States. And when I retired, I had lots of time, and I thought I would write my memoir. And as I was writing, I decided that writing a memoir probably wasn't the best idea, as I might upset a few people who were still alive and rattle a few skeletons in the closet. So I turned the story into a novel. And that's a great way in which I could actually have fun and be creative. But I used little snippets of stories from my life and from my parents' life and put those into the story. But no names, no real people, except some historical figures. So this is my cover of Ripple Effect Because of the War. You see a plane dropping a bomb, and it causes a ripple effect, just like if you throw a stone into the water. And the ripple effect here is the effect on people. So you see there is a mother and a child. So the ripple effect that I'm talking about in the story is the effect of war on a family, just the everyday lives of families that get disrupted when there's ever a war going on. And that is true now and forever. Like in Ukraine right now, there's a horrible war, and I just worry about the families and the children and the evacuees, or what it's like when people recover from that terrible devastation. And that's what happened in England in the Second World War in England. So my story is set in England. First of all, before the war, where people are happy and going out about their everyday life. The two primary people, the hero and the heroine, they lead a normal life in London and fall in love. There's a little bit of a romance there. And then he goes off to war, and she's left behind, and for years and years. And this is what happens in war. Certainly it happened here in London. And elsewhere in England, and I'm sure in the United States as well, anywhere where there's a war and the men go off to war. It used to be the men then. Of course, it doesn't apply so much now. Women go off to war too. But in those days, it was the men were the warriors, and the women were left behind to take care of the children, to take care of the farms, to take care of business, to take care of everything. Oh, I've got a question. Was there a real life inspiration that managed to make their way into your book? Absolutely. Lots of real life inspirations, and I'll get to that in just a little minute. It's a little bit about the skeletons in the closet. So, yeah. So some stories needed to be told. So in this case, the women were left behind, and they took over a lot of the jobs that the men had, really hard working jobs like driving tractors, driving ambulances, picking up dead bodies in after bombing in London, and you know, just doing everything that the men would have done. Really hard work. A lot of city women went to work on the farms and milk cows and deal with pigs and chickens and things like that. So women became really independent, and they managed without their men for a long time. And it's very often what happened. There would be romances would happen, or wartime liaisons between the British women and sometimes the American soldiers, and there were illegitimate children would be born. And that is one of the pieces that's the skeleton in the closet. That was actually my brother was adopted, and because his mother was a single mother, and my mother adopted him. So I've kind of turned that into a little piece in the story, but I turned him into a girl, and her name is Susie. So I got a question here. Can you say for people who are suffering PTSD who refuse to go to therapy? Yep, I will. I'll get to that. Yes. So PTSD is one of the stories, whereas the hero comes back from the war with PTSD, and it has a huge effect on the family. Now, that happens whenever there's war, and PTSD from all kinds of things, from car accidents, and definitely from bombings and shootings in everyday life. It's basically like it's war in our doorsteps. But yeah, people do get PTSD. Now, back in the time when I'm writing, the men would be developing PTSD, and they would have nightmares and night sweats and be terrified, and everybody would think that the theory was then that these people were just weak. And so the guys would not like to admit that they were weak, because guys like to be strong. And so they would often keep all that secret and try and carry on and deal with it by drinking or using drugs and whatever, to deal with the horrors of war. So PTSD is something that a lot of people don't want to admit to and don't want to ask for help. But now, okay, in back in the time I'm writing, it was called battle fatigue, and now it's actually labeled PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was a psychologist in my previous life, and I would treat people who had PTSD, and it is possible to be treated, but people have to admit to it and go through therapy, and it can be tough, but it also can make the changes and get some of that hard wiring from inside the brain. So the first thing is to actually admit that there's a problem. And of course, a lot of people don't want to admit it. Why did I title my book Ripple Effect? Well, if you see my cover, if you throw a stone into a water, it gets that one drop creates ripples that spread right to the edge of the pond, for example. Well, when there is war, or in this case, in this picture, I've got a bomb coming down, then there's a ripple effect that carries on through months and years and through generations because of that initial bad thing that happened. So people will be affected by that, almost like ripple effects in the pond. So people way far away from the original incident will be affected because of the people around them, and because the effect of PTSD, because of the trauma. Hi, I've got a question here. Hi, Jenny. What is the harshest way trauma can manifest in a person? the worst thing is probably suicide. Just not being able to deal with the memories, especially if they feel guilty about killing people, the nightmares, the inability to sleep, the anger, the lashing out at other people, and the addiction. So I would say the harshest way trauma can manifest is in suicide, and I think that happens a lot with returning veterans in the military from not just from recent combat, from past combat. They feel they just can't carry on, and they probably sometimes they don't feel they can fit into society. So suicide is their way out, unfortunately. But help is available if people want to get it. And I talk about that in this book too. The hero who comes back, he does eventually agree to help because he did attempt suicide, and so he went into treatment center. And so some of my my professional skills and memories about that treatment, I've kind of write about it in that book and just briefly give us a sense of how it can be treated and how there can be some hope and some light at the end of the tunnel. So that's in the book too. So it's were you inspired by your practice? You write ripple effect. No, I was inspired by my family. Actually, it was the effect of a child being adopted, which actually happened in my family. Now, in the story, this child was adopted because in the story, it's a girl. Susie's mother was killed by the bombs in London, in theory. And she grew up, thinking that her adopted mother was her mother because the adopted mother didn't tell her because she wanted to be the real mother. So this is very close to home. And in the story, when the child is in her teens, her real mother shows up. And so that is quite devastating and does cause a lot of disruption in the family. So I write about that, about how sometimes when a parent shows up and connects with a child that they've given up, sometimes it doesn't go so well, and sometimes it does go well. So it's just, that's part of the story. Somebody says, reminds me of my grandma's stories about her experience during the Second World War. Yes, France. Yeah, I'm sure you've got lots of stories. And when you grow up, you hear these stories, and they kind of stay in my head, and they kind of want to be told. How long does it normally take for people to get out of their funk from trauma and whatnot? It's not fast. The first thing that you need to do is to admit that you have a problem. So very often it surfaces with addiction. So you need to deal with the addiction first and begin to talk and begin to deal with that. So AA is very good, but also a private psychologist or therapist is very good who deals with hypnosis or self-regulation therapy, which begins to calm the brain. I was trained in that, and hypnosis, and EMDR, which is another therapy. So not just straight talk, but actually going in willingly with that into the hardwired parts of the brain. So that's a little bit technical, but it does take the heat out of the memories. So they just become like watching a movie, and they don't get you as upset as if you're reliving it. So, but it takes time. Yeah, I would say at least a year or two. But somebody has to want to start that process. Okay, so going back to the story and the ripple effect. So the ripple effect here was the effect of the traumatic effect on a particular person coming back into a family. So it's about how the family deals with this, how husbands and wives deal with it, how people change, and how it can often almost destroy a family or destroy a marriage. children get afraid of a parent who is angry and lashes out. And so, it's it can be quite devastating. But in my story, it's not all gloom and doom. There is one of the ripple effects of the war is also that women being left behind, and there's a little wartime romance in there, which is kind of sweet, but it becomes a secret. So some of the skeletons in the closet, the secret adoption, that's a skeleton in the closet, and the post-traumatic stress and the potential risk of suicide, that's also a skeleton in the closet that people don't want to talk about. So this is in the story. Now, because I grew up in England, now I'm in the United States, I grew up, there. I was there for probably about 20 years. And I grew up with a different standard of living than I find in Canada and the United States now. And that is in the book too. So some people might be interested in that, from the people in the United States or in other countries, about what their everyday life was like for people in the cities. For example, I would come home from school because my parents worked, and I would have to come home and light the fire in the house to warm the house up, because we didn't have central heating. We had coal fires, and the coal fire takes a little while to heat up. But once it does, then it heats up very well, and the heat goes almost through the whole house, but not quite. The bedrooms upstairs are kind of chilly, but at least it's not the same kind of cold as you get in some of the northern parts of the United States. But it is cold and damp. So that's coal fires. And then, of course, coal fires were abandoned after a while. There was a Clean Air Act in England that so the coal fires had to go, and we had to use some alternative form of heating. And of course, a lot of people then got central heating and electrical heating. So that's different. I talk about how children, how Susie, the little girl who was adopted, what her life was like in the country, how she had that lot of freedom to ride around on her bikes and get muddy and be off and not be supervised by parents all the time, and to be with her friends, and just have that kind of freedom that a lot of kids that these days don't have, especially not in the city these days, and they don't even want to go out, right? So there's some nice little stories about a child growing up being happy, and then some darker parts where where the family begins to deal with stress. So you also follow this little girl growing up into teenagerhood, into adolescence, and what that was like for a young girl then in England. Because also they had single-sex schools in England, and boys were in one school and girls were in another school, and they didn't really get to know each other. So the opposite sex was kind of curious and interesting and a little scary. So she was growing up in that. So I had fun writing that. So I put in some long stories from my parents and from my life growing up in England, and turned them into fiction. So probably women would enjoy this, because they'd be following development of a mother and a child, and a relationship with a husband. And people in a military family would probably understand some of the stresses and strains that come with being in the military, and what it's like when people come home with the war damage. And people would be interested just to be curious about that period of time in England, before, during, and after the Second World War, and how war affects a family as it did then and does now, with people coming back from Afghanistan and people suffering in Ukraine, wherever there's a war, people suffer, and it does take a toll on the family, and it lasts sometimes for a long time. That's a ripple effect. It can last, it can spread for months and years and through generations as well. So let me talk a little bit about the writing process. When I first started writing this, and I thought I was going to write my memoir, it seemed to flow quite easy, and I didn't show it to anybody. And then when I decided to change it into a novel, I realized I didn't really know quite how to do it. So and then I took it to a critique group. I live in the villages in Florida, and there are lots of critique groups here that will look at your work. They're all authors, published authors, or wannabe authors, and they love writing and reading. So each month, feedback, and I have to say that my English grammar from high school was definitely a little bit rusty to start with. So I needed to have some help to make sure that my writing was grammatically correct. And that really helped. And it took, after a year or more, my manuscript was almost ready as a result of the help of these people. So then I found an editor, somebody who didn't know me, to look at the content, to give me some advice as to whether the story flows properly, whether the people are likable, or whether they're believable. So I had what's called a content editor, and her name was Marsha Butler, and she was amazing, and she really helped me to polish my work. And of course, then I needed to have a line editor, make sure it's all proofread and all of that sort of thing. And then I had to try and find ways to get it published. Now, I think I'm really kind of proud of my book cover. I found somebody on Fiverr who designed my book cover and did the front and the back and all the little bits inside. You just give all the content to the book, to the designer and the book cover person, and he created this really beautiful book. And then once it was created, then I entered it into a competition. Now competitions are really good if you have a book. Even to enter in a competition before it's published, because again you get critiques and you get some help as to whether it's a good book, whether there's some things that you need to tidy up or whatever. So I entered it into the Royal Palm Awards, Royal Palm Literary competition. It's part of the Florida Writers Association. There's a conference every year and a competition every year. So I entered it in the historical fiction and women's fiction and literary fiction, kind of a blended genre, all of them together. And I wasn't expecting anything, but I did get first prize. I didn't even expect that. I just wanted to get some help. So the rubrics, as they're called, that's the help. I tidied up a few things, but yeah, wow, it was amazing. I was like in shock. Hey, and look, I got first prize. I got a little award thing here. You can't read it, but that's my little award. I'm kind of proud of that one. And then I submitted it to Reader's Favorites, and I got a silver award there, and I got a little sticker, and I got 5 stars from Reader's Favorites. So it's worth, if you want to publish your book, it's worth entering into competitions and things like that, because then you get a sense that it's a good book, or at least that some people thought it was a good book. Of course, every writer thinks that their book is fantastic, and sometimes it's it's a little hard on your ego when people say, "Well, I don't really like that bit in it," but hey, that's okay. So I learned so much about writing in that book, and I had so much fun. And the creative side is something that really surprised me. because I would sit down, and I need a lot of quiet in order to write. And I would sit down, and I have a rough idea what I was going to write about. I'd think about a particular scene I was going to write, and then I'd start to write, and then it seemed to just kind of happen. It was just began to flow. It's kind of like being in the zone. I think athletes talk about that. You kind of be in the zone. So where the creative part of your brain, the critical part stops. So you just write it all down. And then when you've kind of thrown it all down, then you go back and check the spelling and things like that. But basically just get it out first. And then don't worry about spelling it right or critiquing it. Just get it out there. Because that creative flow is what you want. It's the creativity that seems to come from somewhere inside. But yeah, it's not quite the same as writing a factual book, because a factual book, you have to be very precise and methodical about it, But mind you, I did have to be a bit precise and methodical about a few things with the historical side of it, because I had to make sure I had the right dates for the beginning and the end of the war, and what was happening here, and who was, what Churchill was saying, and things like that. But the rest of it is about the personalities and the interactions with people. It's just an interesting story, I think. And what I did was I didn't do it from one person's point of view the whole time. Some chapters were from different people's point of view. So hopefully I got inside the skin of different people and what they were thinking and feeling, as opposed to just one person throughout the whole story. So there's some interesting kind of crazy people in there too. Let's see what else I can talk about. If anybody wants to get my book, it is on Amazon. We have my dogs barking in the background. It is on Amazon, and there is a hardcover. This is a hardcover, so it's got a nice paper cover. There's a soft cover one, and then there's an ebook. So a lot of people like Kindles, so you can get it on Amazon. And I would really appreciate if anybody read this book to give me a review, because reviews really help for people to find the book, and Amazon likes reviews. It doesn't have to be a 5-star. It can be a 2-star. So any kind of review, even just a little one, say, hey, I like that, or hopefully not too many negative reviews, but be honest and say what you liked about it, and so that people can decide if they want to read it. Just like if you buy a piece of furniture or something from Amazon, you look at the reviews and see what people think about it. So there you go. And as a change from writing this book, because it took me quite a long time and it was hard work, really, because I probably would sit down for probably about 6 hours a day to do it. And so it was work. And, it gets stiff and you have to get up and walk around a little bit. I think I got some aches and pains in my back as a result of that. So if you're going to be a writer, make sure you have a good chair. Anyway, as a change from that, I decided, once it was published, I decided that I would write a fairy story, a children's book. So I thought, okay. So I wrote, actually I've written two children's stories. They're in the manuscript stage right now, and I have an illustrator illustrating them, who's a friend of mine. She's awesome. Anyway, the first book is called Princess Rose and the Wild Woods, and it's about magic and magical fairies and dragons and knights and flying on unicorns and things like that. So I have probably taken the idea a little bit from Alice in Wonderland, how she shrinks down, goes down the rabbit hole. But here, my Princess Rose just walks across a marsh, and she shrinks down, so she's the same size as the butterflies and things like that. And then the second one is called Princess Rose, Magic or Medicine. So she's off on a mission to try and find magical and good herbs and medicine to treat people who've been injured in a battle, and hopefully to treat a disease that the dragons are carrying. So anyway, those are my little stories that are going to be published fairly soon, I hope. And then I will go back and do the sequel to this to find out in my mind what happens to these people in the next phase of their lives. So hopefully you've enjoyed listening to me. So my name is Jenny Ferns. I live in Florida. I grew up in England. And if you want to connect with me, my email is easy. It's jenny1ferns@gmail.com. And I have a website, Jenny Ferns Writer. And of course, you can find my books on Amazon. Okay? So, love to hear from any of you. And if you want any help with writing a book or publishing, or if you want to ask any questions about my book, please do. Thank you. See you again. And thanks to Reader's Magnet for inviting me. And I hope that you're all enjoying Reader's Magnet. It's great to bring our stories to the world. Goodbye.